Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have with me Alden Wicker. She's an investigative journalist and author. And Alden, before we get started, I just remembered that I haven't switched our intros, so I need to just make a quick announcement.
Okay, cool.
We are launching our Kepperling Preservation Hub, which is an online resource center, and it has a lot of online resources, but then also virtual coffee breaks where you can jump on twice a month and ask for question and answers. You can ask questions, we can give you answers. And there will be a complimentary coffee break at the beginning of February. So feel free to follow us on social media and get that information. Okay. Thank you so much, Alden.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell me about your background.
Yeah, so I've been writing about sustainability and consumer products, especially fashion, since 2011. And in that process, I've done a lot of research on materials. What are they? And then I started looking into the toxicity of certain materials in fashion and chemicals in fashion. In 2019, which led to the publication of my book To Die For. And then I bought an old farmhouse, which you can see in my background.
Yes.
And I realized that a lot of what I had learned and researched in the fashion world actually applies to homes as well. So I had been researching, what is polyurethane? Is it okay? Is it safe? And then I stumbled across the fact that a lot of people are recommending you insulate your home with polyurethane spray foam.
Yes.
And what is that? And how is it applied? And so in the process of trying to renovate this 1840s farmhouse and do it with a lot of love and care, I found myself in a situation where I couldn't find the information I needed, even as an investigative journalist, to make the right decisions around this house. And so I started looking into spray foam insulation because I was recommended I do it all over the place, and then my contractor at the time was like, hey, I'm suing that spray foam company that was recommended to you because the second floor of his house that he had spray foam insulated after 8 years had completely dry rotted. And so I started getting into this, and now I'm also looking into lots of other ways that homes can be filled with toxic products, plastic products, and the different ways, like how building science comes into that in terms of ensuring that you have a really healthy home.
Yeah, I and that's how I found you, is actually somebody had posted the article that you wrote about spray foam, which is, and when we get into that, but it's interesting to me because in the 70s, before I was born, my dad would talked about how they were starting to use that in Colorado because that's where we lived then, and they would go back and the 2x4s would be gone.
Because they dry rotted.
Yeah, because they dry rotted. And these were new houses.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were always, very cautious about it. And then we started hearing, oh, there's different, open cell, closed cell, and that makes a difference. But I
Soy
don't,
based. So yeah.
right. Yeah.
Green
I
card
don't,
certified.
right. Yeah. I don't think it really does, but like it is very hard for someone, a homeowner to kind of wade through and figure out what's wrong. And then when they, stop selling it, to in the 70s, they put it in cans and everybody's spraying it around their openings at their houses. At the cans that you can buy at a hardware store. So I appreciate you sharing what you've learned, because I think it's something that there it's hard to find answers about. So
Yeah.
so what brought you into sustainability?
What brought me into sustainability? I mean, I've always been into sustainability. I would read my mom's Newsweek and Time magazine that came in, and I remember in middle school, I very clearly remembering refusing plastic bags at like Claire's at the mall
Yeah.
because I had read that there was a peak oil crisis and I knew that plastic was made from oil. And so like I've just always been like this. I've grown up tramping around in the woods. And it's just always been like, oh, if, we can protect the environment
Mhm.
from all these problems, like why wouldn't we?
Right.
It's since morphed into, I have a very strong conviction that what is good for your own health is good for the environment.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to sort of be a quote unquote good consumer if you have that short feedback loop of like, oh, I don't want I don't want carcinogens in my home, so I'm gonna eat organic and not
Yeah.
microwave things in plastic and and use natural building materials and all those things.
Right. Yeah. No, that's very true. And that is a shorter term than like thinking of like, what it's going to be in 50 years. So I think that is a
Yeah.
great way to reframe it.
Or like stressing out over like an invisible gas that may or may not be produced at higher levels if you buy this or that. Like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to frame it. So you had so tell me a little bit about the EcoCult, and I think that's on Substack. Is that correct?
Yes. So EcoCult, it's been ecocult.com for a really long time, and just recently moved it over to Substack as a
Okay.
newsletter. But EcoCult, it was a full lifestyle platform. So for a long time, I was just writing about sustainability when it comes to mostly fashion, but also, shopping for your home, food, especially personal care products. Um, and now it's sort of moved into, again, like teaching people how they can reduce their exposure to hazardous chemicals in the things that they buy and the places that they live.
I think that's so important, because I think that people don't often think about all of the toxicity that is around us. And we'll talk a little bit about the plastics, the really
Yeah.
plastics that we're putting into our homes. And I remember I was calling it a drug lunch because the pharmaceutical companies come and buy you lunch. So we went to a lunch um, sponsored by a polystyrene manufacturer,
Yikes.
and they were talking about, you can't the building code had realized they were so toxic that you couldn't install more than 25% in the house, in the interior, and not on the upper floors. And I'm like, why would anybody put that in their home then? Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
even make sense to me. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're highlighting that. So, and now that kind of segues into, so you've talked about some specific home sustainability products, the spray foam and the plastic, the toxic plastics with fires. Can you tell me, kind of tell me about both of those topics?
Yeah, so they definitely go together.
Mhm.
It's really hard right now to renovate or decorate your home without buying plastic products. And I think a lot of people don't recognize how many things that they buy are a type of plastic. So I'll just go through some of them. So you have polyurethane spray foam insulation, you have vinyl products, vinyl siding, vinyl finishes, vinyl like wallpaper. You have PVC pipes, you have polyester and nylon curtains and rugs. You have sort of fake wood uh, furniture, laminated or engineered wood furniture. Um, Acrylic paint is a type of plastic. It's acrylic. It just goes on and on and on. Like all of your electronics, those are all plastic. Your switches and your plates and a lot of different even your lighting that you buy, if you buy it cheaply, that's plastic. So homes right now are filled with plastic at every point.
Mhm.
Um, and there's a few problems with this. So the first problem is they can be toxic, especially what you were saying is the polystyrene insulation. Um, Polystyrene and PVC or vinyl are the two most toxic types of plastic. They release leach off gas. So styrene, if it gets hot, can release polystyrene can release styrene, which is hazardous. And PVC can release vinyl chloride or phthalates, which are endocrine disruptors or hormone disrupting chemicals. And they do this the most when they're new or when they're heated up. So if you have it underneath your roof, that heat can also cause it to release more, sort of like the hot car effect. You ever
Right.
gotten in a car when it's hot, you could smell things
Mhm.
more.
Yeah.
So that's the first problem with filling our homes with plastics. You have, like the laminated wood and engineered wood can have formaldehyde coming out of it. There's been some, scandals with laminate flooring for that reason. And then PVC pipes as well. Like you don't want those bringing water into your home.
Mhm.
So there's all these different things around hazards and toxicity. The second thing that is a problem with these plastics is the building science of them. If you imagine, like, have you ever put on like a super cheap raincoat and you just start sweating, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like a poncho or something like that. Like a
Yeah,
cheap one that
totally.
you could buy like if you're at the amusement park and it gets wet. Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of times when you're using all of these plastic products on your exterior and your insulation, and like you're just wrapping your house in a plastic bag.
Right.
And there are very few people who are well trained enough in building science, which is a very complex science, to understand how exactly to air seal your home using all of these products without causing long-term damage,
Mhm.
dry rot, mold, like all of these things that happen when you're pushing moisture throughout your home in a way that you don't understand, where you're concentrating it coming out of certain holes or
Mhm.
trapping it so that it condenses when it hits the outside sheathing and it's cold outside and then, dries or soaks into that wood. So there's a
Right.
lot to understand there. And that's sort of that's like the problem I have with a lot of like the reply guys that you see online where somebody's saying like, hey, I am having a problem, or there's a lawsuit or something. I'm having a
Yeah.
problem because I had spray foam insulation installed. And they go, well, you did it wrong because you didn't do like, and then they just like throw all this stuff at you, right?
Right.
Like you should have had open cell, you should have had closed cell. Well, that sounds like a hot roof. You should have vented it in this way. Like, and it's like, if it's that complicated, why are we allowing sometimes certified, sometimes not,
Right.
builders who have never taken a course in building science to make these catastrophic, potentially catastrophic decisions?
Right.
Um, and especially with spray foam installers, they use the cheapest labor possible. It's usually because it's not a great job. It's
Right.
it's
Right.
not a it's not a nice job. It's disgusting. It's toxic. And they're often using immigrant labor and to basically do on-site chemistry.
Right.
And not there's no certifications, there's no regulation. And so it's a really risky thing to make these decisions. I've also heard of, people having mold or dry rot behind vinyl wallpaper when they like put up this plastic because it traps
It's
humidity.
not letting the moisture. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The third problem with filling your home with plastic is that plastic burns.
Hmm.
So if there was a UL, which does, you see the UL on like,
Yeah.
they certify safety standards
Hmm.
for electronics and things. So they did an experiment where they set up two living rooms. One was grandma's living room, right? You had a overstuffed couch with like wood and cotton batting on the inside. You have solid wood furniture wood floor, cotton curtains, like everything, a jute basket,
Yeah.
like everything's natural. And then you have the sort of like IKEA room, like the millennial
Yeah.
apartment room where everything's polyester and polyurethane and laminated engineered wood, polypropylene carpeting. And what they did is they lit both of them on fire. So they put a flame on the two couches and then they just sat back and watched what happened. And the synthetic room, the millennial apartment living room, went up in flames so quickly. It was just black, oily smoke coming out, and it reached flashover in under 5 minutes. And
Oh my
flashover
goodness.
is when like everything catches fire because it's so hot.
Yeah.
And the grandma's room, it like the fire slowly spread, but there's
Yeah.
just like white smoke coming out. It was like looking at the two of them, you could see you could sprint past grandma's bedroom.
Mhm.
Like if you were woken up a half hour into that happening, you could still sprint past that
Get
room
out.
and
Yeah.
and get out of the house. The modern room filled with synthetics, you would not survive.
Yeah. And I've seen that video online. So I'll make sure that I post that so that people can see it because it is very dramatic and it's the furnishings, but it's also the building materials.
Yeah.
Yeah, that make that big of a difference. So yeah, and the plastics, I mean, plastics are extremely toxic when they're on fire. So, the plastic trim or the plastic, whatever plastic you have in the house that is going to cause, the fire to not only the smoke's going to be toxic. The smoke could kill you before the fire does.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you have when you have all those plastics burning, like a lot of that so I interviewed a man in Flagstaff, Arizona whose house survived a wildfire. He did everything right. He had sealed his soffit vents with spray foam, so he had nothing but spray foam insulation.
Mhm.
And it turns out his house was too toxic to live in. Um, every surface was just impregnated with hazardous chemicals, and it didn't matter how many times he had the house cleaned. He would have had to rip the completely gut it out.
Yeah.
And eventually he managed to win against the insurance company and get a total loss coverage because he had had a industrial hygienist come out and test everything and prove that it was too toxic to live in. But he's a rarity.
Right.
And he thinks that the house got so hot because the screen door melted,
Yeah.
that the spray foam started breaking down on the walls and just like releasing all of this stuff into the house.
Yeah.
But it also could be that the houses burning nearby, which are also filled with plastic, sort of
Mhm.
created this hazardous smoke, and the house just becomes a sieve and just
Right.
absorbs all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And either way, it was continuing. It wasn't going to be livable. So yeah, that
No.
and that not and I'm sure not very many people would go to that link to hire the environmental hygienist, but that's what you need to do. You need to have the proof
Yeah.
for the insurance companies. Um when you were looking at the spray foam, because I know you kind of went down the deep dive because of looking at your house and wondering how it would impact your mid 1800s house. Did you find a difference between like an existing home and a new home, or were the issues pretty much the same no matter the type of home?
It's definitely a much bigger risk to install spray foam insulation and other plastic products in an older home. The reason why is that older homes, as you know, they're weird little places. And like my home, I'm sitting in a room right now that has like a 4 inch difference between the front wall and the back wall of the room
Mhm.
because the house has settled so much. It's gonna be impossible in these idiosyncratic spaces to do a complete air seal of the house. So you need to, for spray foam not to cause these problems, you need to apply it perfectly.
Mhm.
And that's going to be impossible in a really old home.
Right.
It is possible if you are building a home and installing the spray foam as you build the home
Uh-huh.
because everything's straight, you know exactly where everything is, the walls are all open. So it is possible. Um, but the older the house is, like the people I talked to though, they said they never recommend spray foam above grade, so above the basement
Hmm.
ever. They think it's too risky. Because not only could, so there's two problems with the spray
Mhm.
foam insulation. One is if it delaminates or there are any holes, that'll concentrate all the humidity, all the moisture
Oh,
coming, it
yeah.
just naturally comes out into
Mhm.
a place, and then you have this like dry rot issue,
Mhm.
or mold issue. The other problem is that it might not cure. So if spray foam, so what they do is they come in with two separate canisters of chemicals. You have one canister has the isocyanates.
Mhm.
Another canister has like the blowing agents and fire retardants and like all sorts of stuff that they don't tell you what it is.
Mhm.
And then they combine them on site and they react and they balloon out into the spray foam. Now, the problem is that if you're doing on-site chemistry, there's an infinite number of things that could go wrong.
Right.
It could be too
Yeah.
hot. It could be too cold. It could be, it could be they were stored overnight in too cold temperatures. It could be too humid. There's just so many things. They could be using the wrong chemicals and applying them not according to the manufacturer's instructions. If those things happen, then all the chemicals will not react. The foam will not cure as it's supposed to within 24 hours. And then your home will be off-gassing hazardous chemicals forever. I
Right.
mean, for decades, right?
Yeah.
And so if you get your home, if you get your home spray foam insulated and you go back after 48 hours and it still smells, you're in a mess of trouble because you can't undo spray foam. You
Right.
can't pull it out like you do with batting. It sticks to everything. And so the only way to truly remediate a home with a bad spray foam job is to tear everything out that it's touched.
Oh my goodness.
That could be the sill. That could be your walls. That could be your beams.
Mhm.
And especially for old homes, I don't know why you would take the risk of irrevocably damaging.
Right.
Like you can see behind me, I have these beams. You
Mhm.
can't get wood like this anymore.
No, no. And I agree with you. I think that that's very true. Like it's too much of a risk to take, not only for the building but for your own health and safety.
Your health, your safety, and also your finances. Like this
Oh yeah.
could total your home.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if it was in your article or something else I was reading. I was reading that there's um insurance companies that are being less likely to insure a home with spray foam. So
Yeah, so
yeah.
this is not, it's not happening in the US yet,
Okay. Okay.
but in the UK,
Mhm.
which I think is like maybe a decade ahead of us. So I think
Mhm.
we're going to start seeing this in the US
Right.
as well. There was a government program to green up people's buildings, and they would pay to, there was a government program to green up people's houses,
Mhm.
and they would pay to have people's roofs, especially roof decks, spray foam insulated.
Yeah.
And so 10 years later, there like also the other problem is that you can't see behind the spray foam.
Right.
So you can't see like it might hide the fact that you have a roof leak, it
Mhm.
might hide damage. You might not be able to access certain things like electrical
Right.
or plumbing because it's been covered over, especially if it's a sloppy job. And so insurance companies um, are saying that they don't want to insure homes in the UK that have had spray foam added. And if you can't get insurance, you can't get a mortgage. And so
Right.
people are learning that they can't sell their house, or they're going to have to sell their house at a huge, huge discount because they got this spray foam installed.
So in your research into the specifically the insulation, I'm thinking, there's natural options for a lot of like the
Mhm.
things that we talked about. But for insulation, is there something that you would recommend from a sustainability standpoint that's a better option?
Yeah, so I think everybody who cares about this subject has settled on mineral wool or rock wool insulation. Um, if you're thinking purely sustainability, um, there's some pros and there's some cons.
Hmm.
So before I get into this, like I think it should be said that a lot of chemical companies are promoting spray foam insulation as like a climate friendly solution
Oh, yeah.
because
But it's
it's
plastic.
it's plastic, but they say like it's the most insulating
Mm.
insulation. And
Yeah.
so the benefits of reducing your oil heating bill, for example, makes it a climate friendly thing. Now, you would not sort of earn back. So the spray foam comes with a certain amount of embodied emissions, right? So
Right.
the greenhouse gas emissions that come from just taking oil and turning it into these petrochemicals, which are then sprayed into your house. So
Right.
there's a certain amount of climate damage that's already been done. In order to offset that climate damage, you would have to reduce the amount of oil you're using to heat your house for 10 years.
Hmm.
And then you get to the point where you are making a positive contribution to the environment.
Yeah.
That's a long time. And also, that's if you're using oil to heat your house. If you've already started switching to electric baseboards or radiant heat or heat
Gas.
pumps for
Yeah.
your house,
Yeah.
like that calculation goes out the window. So I do not agree that spray foam insulation is at
Mhm.
all climate positive or
Right.
climate beneficial.
Well, and that's the same argument that the manufacturers use for replacement windows.
Mhm.
And that those windows are, average life 15 years maybe,
Mhm.
and you're never going to get the energy savings they promise in that lifespan. So
No.
that and that's so that's just that it's but I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that's a great way to look at it, and the fact that it's plastic, I mean.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah. So having said that, mineral wool insulation or rock wool is the brand name. They take waste slag from iron making process or stone and they sort of heat it up so much that they can turn it into like a fluffy wool type fiber. They also make rigid board
Okay.
mineral wool insulation as well. And so because of that process, it does come with a certain amount of embodied emissions as well. Not as much as spray foam, but some.
Mhm.
But it has a lot to recommend it. So, because of what it's made of, it's naturally fire retardant. So they don't have to add fire retardant chemicals to it. It's also, mice don't like it, which
Oh,
is
that's great.
a lot to recommend it, especially if you live in a home like mine where
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't own this house. I'm just renting it from the mice who've lived here. So that's really great. They don't like it as much as they do, pink batting. And also it's vapor open. So it's going to allow your house to breathe, which is it just makes everything a little bit easier and
Yeah.
like less it's not as easy to F it up,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah, yeah. Because once the especially older buildings were meant to have some air exchange and some moisture exchange, and once you start to seal that off is when you do tend to see problems in older homes. So the
Yeah.
fact that that allows that exchange to occur the way it has for 200 years is a positive.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
There
You
are
just
other options that I did look at. Like
Mhm.
there's the if you're a super eco person, you could go with hempcrete, of course. You
Oh
could
yeah,
go with timber, like timber rigid board
oh yeah,
or batting. The drawbacks of these is that they're really hard to get your hands on. They're expensive, especially to get them shipped to you. You
oh
need to
yeah,
order a certain amount. And if you're just working with a local contractor, they're they're just gonna want to go and order it from their local place. And so you can
Mhm.
do that with mineral wool, but you can't do it with these like fancy eco, hyper eco installations. But if you have a lot of money to spend and you're the kind of client that, can order get what they want,
Yeah.
like I why not?
Yeah, 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 and yeah. So I think that's a great point, and you can make good choices, and then if you want to, if that's really sustainability and things that are renewable are really important to you, that's a great way. But I think the Rockwell, the fact that it's recycled is a good selling point too.
Yeah. And then finally, I also looked into sheep's wool
Hmm.
and which sounded so fun because like I'm in Vermont and like, like maybe I could get it from my neighbors. Um, it's really hard to process it yourself. It's like it was so much work to process it
Yeah.
yourself. You could buy it, but it's pretty expensive, and the mice love it. So
That's
you
not a good choice. Yeah, they
no,
have
no.
all these little nests.
Yeah, totally. It is naturally fire retardant and
Mhm.
it is like moisture regulating. So if you're building like a tiny home, it's great.
Yeah,
But otherwise it's too much for renovating an old home.
yeah, that makes sense to me. Um, so is there anything else that you wanted to share about either toxicity or about insulation that I didn't think to ask you?
No, I mean, unless you want to go over like some of the other ways in which you can not like avoid using plastic in an old home renovation, like I can talk a little bit about my experience with that.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Okay. So your listeners can't see this, but I'm in a room that I recently renovated. So we have tongue and groove um boards running up the walls, and then I actually lime washed it myself. And so instead of using acrylic paint, which is historically like fairly accurate for a farmhouse, especially,
Yeah.
it costs me a few dollars because you just get lime from your hardware store and salt. And it's antiseptic, it's vapor open, um, zero VOCs. It's
Mhm.
really great. The only thing I would say is that um, as the house has gone through a few seasons, I put it on a little bit too chunky, so I call it room dandruff. Like some of it's fallen
Yeah.
off of the peak of the ceiling onto my
Yeah.
bed, but it was a super fun project, and I would totally recommend it if you're the kind of person who can't deal with any VOCs at
And
all.
that's similar to when you're talking about the mixing process. That's similar to milk paint too. I would.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very similar. And yeah, and then also like I've just had to be really creative and partner with my contractors to find solutions because a lot of them tend to be like, great, we'll use vinyl here. I'm like, no, 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 like what else can we do? So I actually pulled out an old closet that was
Mhm.
lined with not cedar, it was lined with what is it's like a really teak. It was
Oh,
lined
okay.
with teak.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I was like, wherever he wanted to put vinyl to like finish doors on the outside and he needed like a water resistant thing, I was just like,
Uh-huh.
just use this
Oh, yeah.
naturally water resistant wood.
Yeah.
Um, so there's been a lot of that. It's just partnering with him to be like, what other solutions can we come up
Yeah.
with that don't involve plastics as
Yes.
well. And then a lot of it is just like looking for alternatives as well. Like instead of buying plastic switch plates, I found some wooden ones online. And if am buying paint, I'm doing no VOC paint. Um, and trying to, I source all antique and vintage solid wood furniture instead of buying new furniture from Wayfair, which is all
Yes.
engineered wood. So there's a lot you can do to, especially if you're buying secondhand, to keep costs down while like honoring the home.
I have a question about the no VOC paint. Are you using it on the exterior?
No, actually on the exterior, which would turn out to be way more expensive than I had ever imagined or thought. I got Shuzugiban siding, and so
Okay.
it's this Japanese style of siding where they torch it, and then they finish it with a water-based finish, and then it starts off black, and then over the course of the next few years, it'll gray out a little bit, but it requires no paint no finishing, and it'll last for, 20, 30 years without having anything to be put into it.
That's very interesting. I that you just taught me something new.
Yeah, it's a traditional Japanese thing. There's a bunch of Shuzugiban, very, very old houses in Japan. So
Okay.
it's quite beautiful. The paint that I'm using is just in rooms that, just needed a new paint job and,
Yeah.
they have typical, walls that came
Yeah.
with it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Very good. What trends or challenges do you see in sustainability?
In general or with
Yeah, in
house?
general, whichever direction you want to go.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Trends. So people are waking up to plastic.
Mhm.
as in fashion as well, like on EcoCult, one of the top articles was just showing all the different brands that make plastic-free, polyester-free, nylon-free workout gear. People just don't want to be around plastic because they're realizing that it is hazardous and toxic
Yeah.
for your health. So I think that we're going to continue to see that develop in the new year. I also think people are getting very worried about PFAS and how it's in everything.
Yeah.
They tested a bunch of paints, they found it in paint. So PFAS is a class of chemicals, over 10,000 chemicals that are carcinogenic, reproductive toxic, and they're forever chemicals. They never go away. So they're showing up everywhere. And when it comes to homes, I would just avoid anything that says it has a nonstick coating because it might be PFOA free and it might be free of a few, but if it has a nonstick coating, it probably still has some type of PFAS in it.
Yeah.
And we just don't want that in our homes.
Right. That's great advice. Is there anything that you would like to promote?
Yeah, so I would love if people would check out EcoCult on Substack. I do a lot of house stuff there as well. I've done insulation. I'm going to keep talking about a lot of these issues as they come up and providing advice and research. And I am also on LinkedIn. And if anybody has an interest in how their clothing might be affecting their health, especially performance gear, work clothes, uniforms, and this applies to indoor textiles as well, they should definitely pick up my book To Die For, DYE.
Okay. Yeah, very good. I'll put both of those links or all of those links on our website. So if somebody's listening, they didn't get a chance to write it down, they can go there. How can our listeners get in contact with you? Is LinkedIn the best option?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I've learned some things, and I think that this is going to be very valuable to share with our listeners. I think that understanding how our environment, our individual little environments interact with us is important as well. As thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I learned a lot from you, and I will definitely check out some of the sustainability things that you have shared.
Thank you so much, Danielle. This was really great.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.